The red metal lunchbox hit the school hallway floor with a loud clang. The sound echoed against the lockers, sharp enough to make several students stop walking. A few parents near the front office turned their heads at the same time. 6-year-old Lily Harper froze where she stood. Her small hands were still half raised in the air, where the lunchbox had slipped from her fingers. The apple inside rolled across the shiny floor and stopped near someone's shoe, but the silence that followed felt louder than the noise, because standing in front of Lily was the assistant principal, and her voice carried across the hallway in a way that made every child nearby stop pretending not to listen. "Mr. Harper, school policy is very clear." Daniel Harper stood beside his daughter, his shoulders tense, but his voice calm. "I understand," he said quietly, "but Lily has a severe peanut allergy." The cafeteria menu today. The assistant principal raised a hand before he could finish. Policies apply to everyone. A few students whispered behind them. Lily looked down at the floor, her cheeks burning red. She didn't understand the rules adults were arguing about. She only knew everyone was looking at her, and the apple was still sitting on the floor like proof she had done something wrong. But the moment that truly mattered arrived only seconds later. Emma Harper stepped closer to her little sister. Emma was 9, old enough to understand what humiliation looked like. She placed a protective arm around Lily's shoulders. "It's not her fault," Emma said quietly. The assistant principal didn't respond to Emma. Instead, she looked directly at Daniel. "Students are not permitted to bring outside food unless approved by the office." Daniel inhaled slowly. He had spent 3 years raising his daughters alone. 3 years learning how to stay calm in difficult situations. But standing in the middle of a crowded hallway, while his youngest daughter fought back tears, made that calm harder to hold. "I packed her lunch because of the allergy," Daniel explained. "I wasn't trying to break any rules." The assistant principal folded her arms. "Rules exist for a reason." Students continued whispering. A few parents nearby exchanged uncomfortable looks but said nothing. That silence felt heavy, like the entire hallway had decided to watch rather than help. However, what no one realized was that someone else had already noticed something important. Near the bulletin board beside the office door, a woman stood holding a stack of folders. She had been walking down the hallway when the confrontation started. Now she stood completely still, watching. Not the way the others were watching. Not with curiosity. Not with judgment. With concern. But the real turning point had not arrived yet. Daniel finally crouched down and picked up the fallen lunchbox. He brushed off the apple and placed it carefully back inside. His movements were slow and controlled. The kind of control someone learns after experiencing too many difficult days. Lily wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. Daniel looked at her gently. "I know." Emma squeezed Lily's hand again. The hallway slowly began moving once more as students hurried toward their classrooms. But the feeling of the moment remained. Like something unfair had happened and everyone knew it. But the moment that truly mattered arrived only seconds later. The woman near the bulletin board took a step forward. Then she stopped. She seemed to reconsider something. Instead of interrupting the situation, she simply watched Daniel help Lily put the lunchbox back into her backpack. Her eyes followed the small family as they moved toward the classroom doors. Because she had seen moments like this before. Moments where rules quietly pushed compassion out of the room. Daniel stood and gave the assistant principal a small nod. "I'll take the lunch home," he said. The woman nodded stiffly and walked away toward the office. The hallway returned to normal movement. Lockers slammed. Students laughed, but Lily stayed close to Daniel's side. Emma walked slightly ahead, making space through the crowd. However, what happened next changed everything. As Daniel guided his daughters toward their classroom, Lily suddenly stopped. Emma turned back. "What's wrong?" Lily looked across the hallway, toward the woman standing near the bulletin board. The woman was still watching. Their eyes met. For a moment neither moved. Then Lily did something completely unexpected. She waved. Just a small wave, the kind children give strangers without thinking. The woman looked surprised, but after a second, she waved back. Emma noticed it immediately, because Emma noticed everything. But the real turning point had not arrived yet. Daniel didn't see the exchange at all. He was focused on opening the classroom door. "Come on," he said softly. Emma guided Lily inside. But Lily glanced back once more toward the hallway, toward the woman, toward the moment that had just passed quietly between them. Because sometimes children recognize kindness faster than adults did, and sometimes the smallest gestures created the biggest changes. But the moment that truly mattered arrived only seconds later. The woman walked slowly to the nearby desk outside the office. She placed her folders down. Then she pulled out a small notepad. For a moment she hesitated, as if deciding whether she should get involved at all. But the scene she had just witnessed stayed in her mind. A father trying to protect his daughter's dignity. A little girl embarrassed in front of an entire hallway, and a crowd that chose silence. Finally, she wrote something on the paper. 2 simple words. Daniel Harper. She looked down the hallway one more time, because she had a feeling that moment wasn't over yet. Sometimes the smallest injustices revealed the most about people, and sometimes they revealed who was willing to step forward. But what no one in the hallway realized was that a 6-year-old girl had already started thinking about something else entirely. Because Lily Harper didn't just remember embarrassment, she also remembered kindness, and she had a very simple idea about what to do with it. As Lily sat down in her classroom minutes later, she quietly opened her backpack and took out a sheet of paper. Then she began drawing 4 stick figures. And one of them looked exactly like the woman from the hallway. The apartment felt too quiet when Daniel Harper unlocked the door. The hallway light flickered once before turning steady, casting a pale glow over the worn carpet outside their small second-floor apartment. Lily stepped inside first, clutching her backpack tightly against her chest. Emma followed behind her, quieter than usual. Daniel closed the door and leaned his shoulder against it for a moment. For a second, he allowed the silence to settle, because pretending the day had been normal required energy he didn't quite have yet. Yet the moment that truly mattered happened just seconds later. "Daddy," Lily asked softly, "are you sad?" Daniel opened his eyes and forced a small smile. "No," he said gently, "just tired." Lily studied his face carefully. 6-year-olds had a strange ability to notice things adults tried to hide, but she nodded anyway and walked toward the kitchen table. Emma wasn't convinced. Emma leaned her backpack against the wall and crossed her arms slightly. "You didn't do anything wrong today," she said. Daniel turned toward her. "I know." Emma hesitated, but everyone was staring. Daniel looked down at the red metal lunchbox still in his hand. The scratch marks on the lid caught the kitchen light. He set it carefully on the counter. "Sometimes people stare," he said quietly. "That doesn't mean they understand what's happening." Emma didn't argue, but the tension in her shoulders didn't disappear. However, what happened next changed the atmosphere of the apartment. Lily climbed onto one of the kitchen chairs and swung her legs under the table. "Can we have soup tonight?" she asked. Daniel blinked. The question felt oddly normal after everything that had happened. "Sure," he said. He moved around the small kitchen slowly, opening cabinets and placing a pot on the stove. The apartment was modest. 2 bedrooms, a small living room, a narrow kitchen with barely enough space for a table and 4 chairs, but the place still held pieces of a life that had once been fuller. Family photos hung on the wall near the hallway. Emma's drawings covered the refrigerator door, and one photograph sat slightly apart from the others. Daniel noticed it while waiting for the soup to heat. It showed 4 people standing together in bright sunlight. Daniel, Emma, Lily, and Sarah. The memory hit quietly but firmly. However, the real turning point, tea, had not arrived yet. Emma followed Daniel's gaze to the photograph. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Emma said something quietly. "Mom liked that picture." Daniel nodded. She said Lily looked like she was trying to run away from the camera. Lily looked up from the table. "I was," she said proudly. Emma laughed softly. The sound filled the kitchen with something lighter. But the warmth faded just as quickly when Daniel turned back toward the stove, because memories had a way of reminding him what had changed. 3 years earlier, evenings had looked different. Sarah used to stand at the same counter preparing dinner while music played softly in the background. Emma would sit nearby doing homework. Lily would run around the apartment pretending the couch was a mountain. Daniel used to come home from work and feel the entire room come alive. But illness had changed everything. Hospital visits replaced family dinners, whispers replaced laughter, And the day Sarah didn't come home had left a silence that never fully disappeared. And then the moment that truly mattered arrived a few seconds later. Daniel stirred the soup slowly and realized something he rarely admitted out loud. He had stopped imagining the future. Not completely. He still planned school lunches, doctor appointments, rent payments, all the things required to keep life moving. But the part of life that once included love had quietly closed itself. Not because he wanted it to, because losing Sarah had made the idea of loving someone again feel impossible. However, what no one realized was that Lily had already noticed something important. Lily had pulled a sheet of paper from her backpack. She laid it flat on the table and began drawing carefully. Emma leaned closer. "What are you doing?" "A picture," Lily said. Emma watched her sister draw 4 stick figures. Emma pointed at the first one. "That's Daddy." Lily nodded. Emma pointed at the second. "That's me." Another nod. Emma pointed at the third. "That's you." "Yes." Then Emma noticed something strange. There was another figure beside them. Emma frowned. "Who's that?" Lily didn't answer immediately. She colored the figure's hair carefully with a brown crayon. But only a few seconds later, something important happened. "That's the hallway lady," Lily said. Emma blinked. "The one from school." Lily nodded again. Emma glanced toward the kitchen where Daniel stood at the stove. "You don't even know her." Lily shrugged. She waved. Emma crossed her arms. "That doesn't mean she's part of our family." Lily looked down at the drawing thoughtfully. Sometimes Lily understood things differently than everyone else. However, the real turning point had not arrived yet. Daniel carried the soup bowls to the table a few minutes later. The warm smell filled the small apartment. Emma quickly slid the drawing closer to her side of the table. Daniel sat down across from them. "Eat before it gets cold," he said. Lily took a spoonful and smiled. Emma hesitated for a moment. Then she slowly pushed the drawing back into the center of the table. Daniel noticed it immediately. "What's that?" Lily beamed proudly. "A picture of us." Daniel leaned closer. He pointed to the figures. "That's me." Lily nodded. "That's Emma." Another nod. "That's you." "Yes." Then Daniel's finger paused on the 4th figure. His brow furrowed slightly. "And who's this?" Lily answered without hesitation. "The nice lady." Daniel blinked. "What lady?" "The one who looked sad for me in the hallway." Emma sighed quietly. "I told her that doesn't mean she's family." Daniel studied the drawing carefully. He didn't recognize the figure, but something about the idea made him uncomfortable. Because Lily had placed the stranger beside them, as if it made perfect sense. However, what happened next changed everything. Lily looked directly at him. "She's nice," Lily said. "You should talk to her." Daniel laughed softly. Not because it was funny, because children sometimes make connections adults weren't ready to consider. "I think that's enough planning for one day," he said. Emma nodded in agreement, but Lily didn't argue. She simply folded the drawing carefully and placed it back inside her backpack. Because Lily Harper had already decided something very important. The moment that truly mattered, finally appeared. After dinner, while Daniel washed dishes at the sink, Emma quietly opened Lily's backpack again. She pulled out the drawing and stared at it. The 4th stick figure looked oddly familiar. Emma turned toward the window. Across the street, a woman walked past the apartment building. Emma squinted slightly, because the woman's hair and shape looked almost exactly like the figure Lily had drawn. Emma felt a strange chill. Children sometimes guessed things, but sometimes they noticed things adults missed entirely. Emma slowly turned back toward Lily. "How did you know what she looked like?" Emma Harper saw the woman again the next morning. The Maplewood Elementary playground buzzed with the usual morning noise. Kids ran across the blacktop. A basketball bounced near the far fence. Teachers stood by the doors greeting students as buses pulled away. Emma sat on the low brick wall tying Lily's shoelace. That was when she noticed her, the same woman from the hallway. She stood near the edge of the playground beside the metal fence, holding a clipboard and speaking quietly with another teacher. Her posture was relaxed, but her eyes moved slowly across the playground as if she were looking for someone. Emma followed the direction of that gaze. It landed directly on Lily. Emma straightened slightly, because the low "okay" on the woman's face wasn't curiosity. It was concern. And within seconds, the moment that truly mattered finally arrived. Lily looked up and noticed her too. Without hesitation, Lily waved. Just a cheerful, casual wave. Emma groaned softly. "Lily," she whispered, "you can't just wave at strangers." But the woman smiled and waved back. That small exchange lasted only a second, but it created a strange feeling Emma couldn't quite explain. Because the woman didn't look like a stranger anymore, but the real turning point had not arrived yet. The morning bell rang, and children began moving toward the school entrance. Emma grabbed Lily's hand and led her through the crowd. Inside the hallway, lockers slammed and students hurried toward classrooms. Emma tried not to think about the drawing Lily had made the night before, but the memory stayed in her mind. 4 stick figures, and one of them looking exactly like the woman outside. However, what happened next changed everything. Halfway through the morning, the classroom door opened. Lily's teacher paused mid-sentence and looked toward the hallway. A woman stepped inside. The same woman. She carried a folder and spoke quietly with the teacher for a moment. Then the teacher turned toward the class. "Everyone, this is Miss Bennett," she said. "She works with the school district and sometimes visits our classrooms." Claire Bennett smiled politely at the students. Her voice was calm and friendly. But her eyes moved across the room until they found Lily sitting at her desk. Emma noticed that immediately, because Emma noticed everything. But the situation changed only a few seconds later. Claire walked slowly between the desks while the class continued working on their reading assignment. When she reached Lily's desk, she crouched down slightly. "What are you drawing?" she asked gently. Lily turned the paper toward her. It was another picture. Emma leaned sideways to see it. The drawing looked familiar. 4 stick figures again. But this time Lily had added more details. Hair, smiles, even small bracelets drawn on 2 of the figures. Claire studied the drawing for a moment. Then she asked a simple question. "Who are these people?" Lily pointed proudly. "That's my dad." Claire nodded. "And that's my sister Emma." Emma tried to look busy with her book. Then Lily pointed to herself. "And that's me." Claire smiled softly. Then she pointed to the 4th figure. "And who's this?" Lily answered without hesitation. "That's you." Emma nearly dropped her pencil. Claire blinked in surprise. "Me?" Lily nodded. "You were in the hallway yesterday." Claire glanced briefly toward Emma. Emma quickly looked back down at her desk. However, what Lily said next changed the entire mood of the conversation. "You look sad for me," Lily added quietly. Claire paused. For a moment she didn't speak. Because children had a way of noticing emotions adults thought they had hidden. Finally she nodded. "I was," Claire admitted softly. Emma looked up again. That answer surprised her. Most adults pretended everything was fine. But Claire hadn't. However, the real turning point had not arrived yet. Claire stood up and thanked the teacher before leaving the classroom. But as she stepped into the hallway, she paused for a moment. The image of Lily's drawing stayed in her mind. A simple picture, but something about it felt meaningful. A father, 2 daughters, and an extra space someone had filled in. Claire had worked with families long enough to recognize something important. Children didn't draw strangers into their family pictures unless they were imagining something, or hoping for something. However, what no one realized was that Lily had already noticed something important again. Back inside the classroom, Emma leaned to stirred Lily. "You shouldn't tell people they're in our family," Emma whispered. Lily shrugged. "She's nice." Emma sighed. "You don't even know her." Lily smiled slightly. She noticed Emma frowned. Noticed what? But Lily didn't answer. Because sometimes Lily's ideas were still forming in her mind. Yet the situation shifted only seconds later. Outside the school building, Claire walked across the parking lot toward her car. She opened her folder and glanced at the schedule for the day. But instead of getting into the car, she paused. Her mind kept returning to the moment in the hallway yesterday. A little girl embarrassed in front of an entire crowd. A father staying calm even when he clearly wanted to defend his daughter. And a silent hallway full of people who chose not to step in. Claire closed the folder slowly, because moments like that usually revealed something about a family's situation. And sometimes those moments meant someone needed help. But the real turning point had not arrived yet. Claire reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook. She wrote down a name, Daniel Harper. Then she checked the school records quickly. Parent information appeared on the screen. Occupation, address, emergency contacts. Claire studied the information quietly, not with suspicion, with curiosity. Not with suspicion, with curiosity. However, what happened next changed the direction of her entire afternoon. She noticed the employer listed under Daniel's contact information, Maplewood Grocery Market. Claire closed the notebook. She stood in the parking lot for a moment, thinking carefully. Technically, there was no official reason for her to visit, but something about Lily's drawing stayed in her mind, and sometimes small instincts were worth following. And then, only seconds later, something important happened. Claire got into her car. She started the engine and pulled out of the school parking lot. Across the seed, Daniel Harper stacked boxes in the back storage room of Maplewood Grocery. He wiped sweat from his forehead and checked his watch. Just another normal shift, or so he thought. But what he didn't know was that someone had just parked outside the store. Someone who had seen a moment in a school hallway. Someone who had noticed something others ignored. And someone who was now walking toward the entrance. A few minutes later, Daniel stepped outside for his lunch break, and the first person he saw standing near the door was Claire Bennett. Daniel Harper stepped outside the grocery store for his lunch break, and almost walked straight back inside. Claire Bennett stood a few feet from the entrance, holding a small folder against her side. For a moment, neither of them moved. The afternoon sun reflected off the grocery store windows, casting long shadows across the parking lot. A few shopping carts rattled in the distance as customers pushed them toward their cars. Daniel had expected 10 quiet minutes alone with his sandwich. Instead, he was looking at the woman who had watched his daughter cry in the school hallway the day before. But only moments later, everything quietly changed. Claire spoke first. "Mr. Harper." Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes." Her voice was calm, almost careful. "My name is Claire Bennett. I work with the Maplewood School District." Daniel already knew that, but he nodded again anyway. "I remember." An awkward pause stretched between them, because neither of them had planned this meeting. However, what happened next changed the tone of the moment. Claire shifted the folder slightly and looked at him with quiet sincerity. "I wanted to say something about yesterday," she said. Daniel's shoulders tightened just a little. The memory of the hallway still lingered in his mind. "It wasn't necessary," he replied. Claire shook her head gently. "I think it was." The wind moved lightly across the parking lot, carrying the faint smell of fresh bread from the bakery section inside the store. Claire continued. "The way that situation was handled, it shouldn't have happened like that." Daniel studied her expression carefully. He had dealt with enough polite apologies over the years to recognize when someone was speaking out of obligation. But Claire didn't seem obligated. She seemed genuinely bothered by what she had witnessed. However, the real turning point had not arrived yet. Daniel leaned back against the metal railing beside the store entrance. "School rules are school rules," he said quietly. Claire nodded. "Yes." Then she added something that surprised him. "But sometimes people forget to look at the child standing in front of them." Daniel blinked once, because that was exactly what had hurt the most. Not the rule, the crowd, the silence. Lily standing there feeling like she had done something wrong. But what happened next changed everything. "Lily handled it very bravely," Claire said. Daniel's expression softened slightly. "She's tougher than she looks." Claire smiled faintly. "I noticed." For a second, the conversation felt lighter, almost normal, but Daniel still kept a careful emotional distance. 3 years of raising 2 daughters alone had taught him something important. New connections came with risks. However, what no one realized was that the real catalyst for the moment was sitting several blocks away inside Maplewood Elementary. Lily Harper. At that exact moment, Lily sat at her desk during afternoon activity time. Her teacher had asked the class to write a short message or draw a picture for someone who had helped them recently. Emma sat beside her, working carefully on a thank you note to the school librarian. Lily stared at her blank paper for a moment. Then she began writing slowly. Emma glanced over. "What are you doing?" "A letter?" Lily whispered. Emma raised an eyebrow. "To who?" Lily didn't answer. She continued writing carefully, sounding out each word in her head. But what happened next changed everything. Lily stood up and walked toward the classroom door. Emma immediately noticed. "Lily," she whispered urgently. Where are you going? But Lily was already stepping into the hallway, and then something unexpected happened. She walked straight toward the front office. The school secretary looked up from her computer. Hi there, Lily. What do you need? Lily placed the folded paper on the desk. This is for the lady who helps, she said. The secretary tilted her head slightly. Which lady? The one who was in the hallway yesterday, Lily explained. Emma arrived a few seconds later, slightly out of breath. Oh, no, Emma muttered under her breath. The secretary unfolded the note curiously, but the real turning point had not arrived yet. Back at the grocery store, Daniel finally opened the brown paper bag holding his lunch. He took one bite of his sandwich. Then he realized Claire was still standing there. You don't have to stay, he said politely. Claire shook her head. I actually stopped by for another reason. Daniel frowned slightly. What reason? Claire hesitated. Because the reason suddenly felt stranger than she had expected. However, what happened next changed everything. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Claire pulled it out and glanced at the screen. Maplewood Elementary office. She answered immediately. Hello. The secretary's voice came through the speaker. Claire, one of the Harper girls just left something for you. Claire blinked in surprise. Lily? Yes. Claire looked toward Daniel instinctively. What is it? The secretary laughed softly. It's a note. Daniel felt a small knot form in his stomach, because Lily had a very creative idea of what counted as a good idea. Moments later, everything changed. The secretary cleared her throat and read the message out loud. Dear hallway lady, my dad is lonely. Claire froze. Daniel nearly choked on his sandwich, but the message wasn't finished. The secretary continued reading. So I think you should come to dinner. The parking lot went completely silent. Claire slowly lowered the phone from her ear. Daniel stared straight ahead, wishing the asphalt would open up beneath his feet. However, what no one realized was that Lily Harper had just set something much bigger into motion. Inside the school office, Emma covered her face with both hands. I told you not to do that, she whispered. Lily looked completely confident. She needed to know. Emma groaned. Daddy is going to die of embarrassment. But Lily didn't look worried, because in Lily's mind, the solution to loneliness was very simple. Invite someone to dinner. However, the moment that truly mattered came seconds later. Back in the grocery store parking lot, Daniel slowly turned toward Claire. He rubbed his forehead with one hand. I'm really sorry about that. Claire looked at him. For a second, she didn't say anything. Then she did something unexpected. She laughed. Not loudly, but warmly. And that reaction changed everything. Claire folded the phone back into her pocket and looked directly at Daniel. So, she said with a small smile, should I bring dessert? The knock on Daniel Harper's apartment door came earlier than he expected. Daniel froze in the middle of the kitchen. The soup on the stove bubbled quietly, sending warm steam into the small apartment, but suddenly the room felt too still. Emma sat at the table finishing her homework. Lily stood on a chair beside the counter trying to see inside the pot. The knock came again, soft, polite, certain. Daniel looked toward the door and felt a wave of nervous energy rise in his chest, because there was only one person it could be. However, the moment that truly mattered came seconds later. Is that her? Lily asked excitedly. Daniel rubbed his forehead. I don't know. Emma leaned back in her chair. Yes, you do, she muttered. Daniel walked slowly toward the door. Every step felt strangely dramatic for such a small apartment hallway, because the last thing he had expected today was a dinner guest, especially one invited by a 6-year-old. However, what happened next changed everything. Before Daniel could reach the handle, Lily jumped off the chair and ran to the door. Lily, wait, Emma called. But Lily had already pulled the door open. Claire Bennett stood in the hallway holding a small paper bag. She looked slightly nervous, but she smiled. Hi. Lily grinned like she had just solved the biggest problem in the world. You came. Claire nodded. I brought dessert. Daniel appeared behind Lily, clearly unsure how to respond. I'm really sorry about this, he said quickly. She didn't exactly ask permission. Claire laughed softly. I noticed. However, the moment that truly mattered came seconds later. Claire stepped inside the apartment. The space was small but warm. Family photos lined the wall. Family photos lined the wall. Emma's school projects covered the refrigerator door. A stack of children's books sat beside the couch. Claire noticed everything quickly, not with judgment, with quiet curiosity. Because this was the home of the family she had been thinking about since yesterday's hallway incident. Emma stood up from the table. She crossed her arms slightly but gave Claire a polite nod. Hi, Claire replied gently. Emma pulled out the extra chair at the table. You can sit here. However, the real turning point had not arrived yet. Dinner started awkwardly. Daniel poured soup into 4 bowls while Lily talked nonstop. Emma occasionally corrected her. Claire listened carefully. You work at the grocery store? Claire asked Daniel. Daniel nodded. Night shifts mostly. That must be tiring. Daniel shrugged. You get used to it. However, what happened next changed the tone of the conversation. Lily suddenly spoke up. Daddy used to cook more. Daniel paused slightly. Emma looked down at the table. Claire noticed the shift immediately. Used to? She asked gently. Emma answered quietly. Before Mom got sick, the room grew quieter, because even after 3 years, mentioning Sarah Harper still changed the atmosphere. Daniel stirred his soup slowly. She loved dinner time, he said. Claire nodded. That sounds like her. Daniel looked up slightly surprised. You never met her? Claire shook her head. No, but I've met families like yours. However, the moment that truly mattered came seconds later. Claire turned toward the girls. You two take very good care of your dad. Lily smiled proudly. Emma tried not to smile but failed. Someone has to remind him to relax, Emma said. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Oh, really? Emma shrugged. However, what no one realized was that Lily had already noticed something important again. Lily suddenly jumped off her chair. I forgot something. She ran down the hallway toward the bedroom. Emma sighed. Here we go. Claire tilted her head. What's happening? Emma answered honestly. She has a plan. But the real turning point had not arrived yet. Lily returned seconds later holding a folded sheet of paper. She placed it proudly on the table in front of Claire. It's our family picture. Claire unfolded it slowly. Daniel leaned closer. Emma already knew what it showed. 4 stick figures. Daniel, Emma, Lily, and one more. Claire. The drawing was simple but cheerful. Everyone was smiling. However, the moment that truly mattered came seconds later. Claire studied the drawing more carefully, because Lily had added new details since the last time she saw it. Small bracelets on 2 of the figures. Claire's eyebrows lifted slightly. Where did you get this idea? She asked softly. Lily shrugged. You wear one. Claire slowly lifted her wrist. A thin silver bracelet rested there. Daniel frowned slightly. Emma has one like that too. Emma nodded. It used to be Mom's. Claire looked back at the drawing again, because Lily had drawn the bracelet before ever seeing Emma wear it. However, what happened next changed everything. Claire placed her dessert bag on the table and opened it. Inside was a small box of cookies, but tucked beside the box was something else. A silver bracelet. Claire held it carefully. My sister gave this to me years ago, she explained. Emma leaned closer. The bracelet looked almost identical to the one their mother used to wear. Daniel stared at it for a moment, because the coincidence felt strangely personal. However, the moment that truly mattered came seconds later. Lily pointed at the drawing. See, she said proudly. Claire looked at the picture again, then at the bracelet, then at Daniel, because suddenly the drawing didn't look random anymore. It looked like something Lily had felt before anyone else did. But the real turning point had not arrived yet. Dinner continued, with quieter conversation. Lily happily ate cookies. Emma asked Claire questions about her job. Daniel listened more than he spoke. But for the first time in a long time, the apartment didn't feel lonely. It felt full, warm, alive. However, the moment that truly mattered came seconds later. As Claire stood to leave later that evening, she picked up the drawing again. Her eyes paused on one small detail. The bracelet on the 4th stick figure, exactly like the one on her wrist. Claire looked at Lily slowly. How did you know to draw this? She asked. Lily shrugged. I just knew. Emma frowned slightly. Daniel looked thoughtful, because sometimes children noticed things adults weren't ready to understand, and sometimes those observations changed everything. Claire slipped the tog, drawing into her purse. But as she stepped toward the door, Lily said something quietly. "I think Mom picked you." The whisper started near the bread aisle. Daniel Harper noticed it without even turning his head. Two customers stood beside the display of packaged rolls, leaning slightly closer together as they spoke. One of them glanced toward the front of the store where Claire Bennett stood near the checkout counter holding a basket. Then they looked back at Daniel. Their voices lowered, the kind of quiet conversation that was meant to travel. Daniel placed another crate of apples onto the display table and kept working. Small towns had a rhythm to gossip. It started as curiosity, then it became speculation. Then it became speculation. Then it became speculation. Eventually it turned into something people repeated as fact. However, the moment that truly mattered came seconds later. Claire walked toward the exit with her groceries. As she passed the fruit display, she paused. "Hi," she said casually. Daniel nodded. "Hi." Their conversation lasted less than 10 seconds, but it was long enough for the two customers near the bread aisle to exchange another look, and just like that, the story had a beginning. However, the real turning point had not arrived yet. Later that afternoon, Daniel drove to Maplewood Elementary to pick up Emma and Lily. The parking lot buzzed with the end-of-day rush. Children ran toward waiting cars while parents stood talking near the sidewalk. Emma climbed into the truck first. Lily followed behind her, but Lily hesitated before closing the door. "Daddy," she said. "Yes." Lily looked toward the school building. Some kids were talking today. Daniel felt a quiet tension settle in his chest. "What kind of talking?" Emma answered before Lily could, "The hallway kind." Daniel understood immediately, because whispers always reach children first. However, the moment that truly mattered came seconds. "La terre," Emma continued. "They said the school lady is your girlfriend." Daniel almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he rubbed the back of his neck. "That's not true." Emma shrugged. "I know." But Lily leaned forward from the back seat. "That's not true." Emma shrugged. "I know." But Lily leaned forward from the back seat. "I like her." Emma rolled her eyes. "That's not the point." The truck pulled away from the curb and merged into the slow afternoon traffic. Daniel kept his eyes on the road, but his thoughts were already racing ahead, because small-town rumors didn't just affect adults. They followed children into classrooms, onto playgrounds, into quiet moments when they should have felt safe. However, what happened next changed the mood inside the truck. Lily leaned forward between the seats. "Why are people weird about it?" she asked. Daniel searched for an answer simple enough for a 6-year-old. "Sometimes people talk about things they don't understand." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "They also get bored." That explanation felt more accurate than Daniel expected. However, the real turning point had not arrived yet. A few days later, the whispers grew louder. At the grocery store, a co-worker nudged Daniel's shoulder while they stocked shelves. "So, you and the school counselor?" Daniel didn't look up. "We had dinner once." The co-worker grinned. "That's how it starts." Daniel didn't answer, because the comment hit closer to something he had been trying not to think about. However, the moment that truly mattered came seconds later. Daniel stepped outside for his break. Claire stood near the curb beside her car. She looked hesitant. "I think the town is getting ahead of itself," she said. Daniel exhaled slowly. "That happens here." Claire nodded. "I don't want this to cause problems for your daughters." Daniel leaned against the railing beside the store entrance. "Neither do I." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The late afternoon sun dipped lower across the parking lot. Cars moved slowly along the street, and the quiet between them carried a different kind of weight. However, what happened next changed everything. Daniel said something he hadn't said out loud before. "Maybe we should slow down." Claire looked at him carefully. "We already are." Daniel shook his head. "I mean slower than this." Claire understood the meaning immediately. Not distance because he disliked her. Distance because he was afraid of the consequences. However, the moment that truly mattered came seconds later. Claire spoke gently. "Are you worried about the town or about something else?" Daniel hesitated, because the honest answer felt difficult. But the truth surfaced anyway. "I'm worried about hurting my girls." Claire's expression softened. "You're trying to protect them." Daniel nodded. Losing their mom was hard enough. Claire didn't argue, but she didn't agree completely either. Sometimes protection and fear looked very similar. However, the real turning point had not arrived yet. Later that evening, Daniel stood in the kitchen washing dishes. Emma sat on the couch doing homework. Lily colored quietly at the table. The apartment felt calm again, normal, but the conversation with Claire still echoed in his mind. However, the moment that truly mattered came seconds later. Emma spoke from the living room. "Dad?" "Yes." "Are you going to stop seeing her?" Daniel paused. The dishwater continued running over his hands. "I don't know," he said honestly. Emma didn't respond right away. Then she said something quietly. "She makes Lily happy." Daniel turned off the faucet, because sometimes children understood emotional truths faster than adults. However, the real turning point had not arrived yet. A few minutes later, Daniel stepped onto the small apartment porch to call Claire. The evening air carried the faint sounds of traffic from the nearby street. Claire answered on the second ring. "Hi." Daniel leaned against the railing. "I've been thinking." Claire waited. "Maybe it's better if we keep things simple," Daniel said. "Simple how?" Daniel stared down at the quiet sidewalk below. No dinners, no visits, just normal. Claire didn't answer immediately, because she understood what he meant. Distance, protection, fear. However, what Daniel didn't realize was that someone had quietly opened the porch door behind him. Lily stood there listening, and what she heard next changed everything. Daniel spoke softly into the phone. "I can't risk loving someone again." Lily's small hand tightened around the doorframe, because that sentence felt like something very important breaking. But the real turning point had not arrived yet. Sometimes children heard truths adults believed were hidden, and sometimes those truths started something new. Lily quietly closed the porch door and walked back inside. Then she pulled out her drawing again and began adding something new to it. Lily Harper stood on a chair in front of the refrigerator before anyone realized what she was doing. It was early evening. The small apartment kitchen glowed with the warm yellow light above the table. Daniel had just returned from work and set his keys beside the red lunchbox on the counter. Emma was flipping through a school notebook. Waist in, everything looked ordinary, until Lily reached behind one of the refrigerator magnets and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Emma looked up immediately. "Lily, what are you doing?" Lily held the paper carefully, like something fragile. "I found Mom's note." The room went quiet. Daniel froze halfway across the kitchen, because he knew exactly which note she meant. However, the moment that truly mattered came seconds later. Daniel stepped closer slowly. "Where did you find that?" Lily pointed at the refrigerator. It was hiding. Emma slid her notebook aside and leaned forward. "That's been there forever," she said quietly. Daniel took the paper from Lily's small hands. He recognized the fold lines instantly. 3 years earlier, Sarah had written it on an ordinary afternoon. At the time, it hadn't seemed important. Now it felt like something preserved from another life. However, the real turning point had not arrived yet. Daniel unfolded the paper slowly. The handwriting was unmistakable. Neat, familiar. Sarah's. For a moment, he simply stared at the words without speaking. Emma watched him carefully. Lily climbed down from the chair and leaned against the table. "Read it," she said softly. Daniel swallowed. Then he began reading out loud. "If the girls ever think you look too serious again, remind them that you used to smile the most when you cooked dinner." His voice grew quieter as he continued. "And one day, someone might notice that smile again." Emma looked down at the table. Lily looked proud, but Daniel stopped reading, because the final sentence hit harder than he expected. However, the moment that truly mattered came seconds later. He finished the message. "Don't be afraid to let grow again." The kitchen stayed silent. The only sound was the soft ticking of the wall clock. Claire stood near the doorway of the living room. She had arrived earlier that evening to drop off a book Lily had forgotten at school. Now she watched quietly, realizing she had walked into something deeply personal. However, what happened next changed everything. Lily spoke first. "See." Daniel looked at her. "See what?" Lily pointed toward Claire. "Mom said someone would notice your smile again." Emma covered her face with her hands. "Oh no." Daniel exhaled slowly, because Lily's logic was simple and strangely hard to argue with. However, the real turning point had not arrived yet. Claire stepped forward, gently, I can leave if this is a bad time, she said. Daniel shook his head immediately. No, it's okay. He folded the note again and placed it carefully on the table. For a moment he didn't know what to say. 3 years of quiet grief had trained him to avoid conversations like this, but Lily had opened the door anyway. However, the moment that truly mattered came seconds later. Daniel looked directly at Claire. I think my daughters have been planning something. Claire smiled slightly. I noticed. Emma groaned softly. She started it. Lily shrugged. You needed help. You needed help. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Help with what? Lily answered immediately, with smiling. Emma couldn't stop herself from laughing, because the explanation was so simple, but the truth underneath it was impossible to ignore. However, what happened next changed the tone of the entire room. Daniel spoke more honestly than he had in years. I wasn't ready to think about loving someone again. The words felt strange coming out loud, but they were true. Claire nodded quietly. That makes sense. Daniel looked at her. Does it? Claire leaned against the kitchen counter. Grief doesn't disappear just because time passes. Emma listened carefully. Lily traced circles on the table with her finger. Daniel continued. When Sarah died, everything changed. His voice stayed calm but heavy. I wasn't just losing my wife. My daughters were losing their mother. Claire didn't interrupt. Sometimes the most important support was simply listening. However, the moment that truly mattered came seconds later. Daniel looked down at the note again. She always believed people should keep living fully, he said. Emma nodded slowly. That sounds like Mom. Lily smiled. She was smart. Daniel laughed quietly. Yes, she was. The tension in the room eased slightly, because the conversation had shifted from loss to, memory, and memory had a softer edge. However, the real turning point had not arrived yet. Emma suddenly stood up and walked down the hallway. Everyone watched her disappear into the bedroom. What is she doing? Lily whispered. I'm not sure, Daniel replied. Emma returned a moment later holding something small in her hand. She placed it carefully on the table beside Sarah's note. A silver bracelet. Claire's eyes widened slightly, because she wore an identical one on her wrist. Emma noticed the reaction immediately. It was Mom's, she explained. Claire slowly lifted her own wrist. My sister gave me this one years ago. The two bracelets looked almost identical. Simple silver, delicate, nearly the same design. The coincidence felt strangely powerful. However, the moment that truly mattered came seconds later. Lily leaned closer to study them. See, she said. Daniel raised an eyebrow. See what? Lily pointed at the bracelets. They match. Emma shook her head, half laughing. You think everything means something. But Lily wasn't joking, because in her mind, the pieces of the story were fitting together. The hallway, the drawing, the dinner, the note, and now, the bracelets. However, the real turning point had not arrived yet. Claire gently set her bracelet beside Sarah's on the table. The metal caught the kitchen light. Two nearly identical circles, side by side. Daniel stared at them longer than he expected, because sometimes life created connections no one planned. And sometimes those connections arrived exactly when people needed them most. Lily leaned back in her chair and smiled confidently. See, she said again. I told you Mom picked her. The first time Daniel held Claire's hand in public, it happened because Lily let go first. It was a cool October evening in Maplewood. Strings of orange lights hung across the town square, glowing above rows of booths and food stands. The annual fall festival had filled the streets with families, laughter, and the smell of fresh apple cider. Daniel stood near the edge of the square, watching Lily and Emma race toward a pumpkin painting table. Claire stood beside him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Because the last time Daniel had stood in this same town square, 3 years earlier, Sarah had been beside him. However, the moment that truly mattered came seconds later. The moment that truly mattered came seconds later. Daddy, Lily shouted from across the square. Daniel looked up. Lily waved dramatically, holding a small paintbrush in one hand. Come see. Emma followed behind her, shaking her head. She's already made a mess, Emma said loudly. Daniel laughed softly, and the laugh surprised him, because it came naturally. But the real turning point had not arrived yet. Months had passed since the dinner Lily had arranged. Life had changed slowly, almost without anyone noticing. Claire started stopping by the apartment after school some evenings. Sometimes she helped Emma with homework. Sometimes she sat at the kitchen table while Lily explained the complicated rules of her imaginary games. Sometimes she simply stayed for dinner. Nothing had happened quickly, but something steady had grown. However, the moment that truly mattered came seconds later. Claire handed Daniel a cup of cider. "You're smiling," she said quietly. Daniel looked at her. "I guess I am." Claire nodded towards the square. They did that. Daniel followed her gaze. Emma was helping Lily clean paint off her hands. The girls looked happy, safe, stable again. For a long time, Daniel had worried he could never give them that feeling again, after losing Sarah. But what happened next changed everything. A group of neighbors passed by. One of them nodded toward Daniel and Claire. "Good to see you both," the man said. Daniel nodded back. The moment felt simple, normal, because the whispers that once followed them through Maplewood had slowly faded. People had watched the small moments over the past months. Claire walking Emma home from school. Daniel and Claire attending a school play together. Lily insisting everyone come to the park on Saturday mornings. Eventually, the town had stopped asking questions. However, the real turning point had not arrived yet. "Come here," Lily called again. Daniel and Claire walked across the square toward the pumpkin painting table. Emma stepped aside so they could see. Lily held up a small painted pumpkin proudly. "This is our family pumpkin," she announced. Daniel studied it carefully. 4 small stick figures were painted across the orange surface. Emma pointed. "That one's Dad." Lily nodded. "That's Claire." Emma pointed again. "That's me." "And me," Lily added proudly. Daniel smiled. The pumpkin was messy, uneven, and absolutely perfect. However, the moment that truly mattered came seconds later. Lily reached into her small backpack. "Wait," she said. "I brought something else." Emma sighed. "You bring drawings everywhere." Lily ignored her. She unfolded a piece of paper and ran toward the large community board near the craft booth. The board was filled with children's drawings from the festival. Families, houses, pumpkins, pets. Lily pinned her drawing in an empty space. Daniel and Claire stepped closer to look. However, what happened next changed everything. The drawing showed 6 stick figures standing together. Daniel pointed. "That's us." Lily nodded. Emma studied the paper more carefully. "One of these is Grandma," Emma said. Lily nodded again. Emma pointed to the last figure. "Who's this?" Lily shrugged happily. "That's later." Claire laughed softly. "You're planning ahead." Lily looked proud of that idea. "I always do." But the real turning point had not arrived yet. Daniel studied the drawing longer than expected. The 6 figures stood close together, holding hands. It looked simple, but something about it felt deeply meaningful. Because for a long time Daniel believed his family story had ended the day Sarah died. Now he realized something important. The story hadn't ended, it had just been waiting for a new chapter. However, the moment that truly mattered came seconds later. Emma leaned toward Lily and whispered something. "What?" Lily asked. Emma smiled. "You were right." Lily beamed. "I know." Emma laughed quietly. "I hate when you're right." But Lily didn't mind, because she had been sure from the beginning. However, what happened next changed everything. As the evening air grew cooler, Claire rubbed her hands together slightly. Daniel noticed. Without thinking, he reached for her hand. The gesture felt natural, unplanned. Claire looked at their hands for a moment. Then she smiled and held his hand back. Across the square, music began playing from the small festival stage. Families moved between the lights and food stands. Emma noticed the moment immediately. She nudged Lily. "Look." Lily turned and saw Daniel and Claire standing together, hand in hand. She leaned close to Emma and whispered proudly, "See?" Emma rolled her eyes but smiled. "I guess your plan worked." Lily nodded confidently. "I told you." However, the moment that truly mattered came seconds later. Daniel looked around the festival, the town lights, the music, his daughters laughing nearby, Claire standing beside him. And for the first time in years, the future didn't feel like something he had to protect himself from. It felt open again, Not because he had forgotten Sarah, but because life had found a way to grow around the space she left behind. Sometimes love didn't replace what was lost. Sometimes it simply joined the story, and sometimes it started with a 6-year-old girl who refused to let her father stay lonely forever. Later that night, Lily taped the festival drawing to the refrigerator. Then she quietly added, "One more tiny stick figure in the corner, just in case the family kept growing."